Apollo 11 moon landing mystery. The year was 1961. The world was not calm, it was divided. Two superpowers were watching each other closely. On one side was the United States of America, on the other side was the Soviet Union. This was not just politics, this was a race for power, and the battlefield was not land, it was space. At that time, the United States was losing. The Soviet Union had shocked the world. They sent the first satellite, Sputnik, into space. Soon after, they sent the first human, Yuri Gagarin, into orbit. The message was clear. The Soviet Union was ahead, very far ahead. In Washington, fear was growing. American leaders knew one thing: if they lose the space race, they lose global respect. Inside the White House, tension filled the air. President John F. Kennedy was young, but the pressure on his shoulders was heavy. Every newspaper talked about Soviet success. Every radio broadcast reminded Americans of defeat. People were asking questions. Is America falling behind? Is the Soviet Union stronger? Can the United States catch up? The answers were not easy. One quiet morning, President Kennedy called an emergency meeting. Top scientists, military leaders, NASA officials, they all gathered in one room. The mood was serious. No smiles, no jokes. Everyone knew this meeting was important. Very important. Kennedy listened carefully. NASA officials explained the situation. America was behind in rockets, behind in technology, behind in experience. One scientist spoke honestly. "Mr. President, catching up will be extremely difficult." Another said, "We need time, many years." Kennedy stayed silent. He looked around the room, then he asked one simple question. "What can we do to win?" The room went quiet. No one answered. Minutes passed. Then one voice broke the silence. A NASA advisor spoke carefully. "There is one thing," he said. "One bold move." Everyone turned toward him. He continued, "We can aim for the moon." The moon, the word echoed in the room. Some people laughed nervously, others looked shocked. The moon was far, dangerous, never attempted. Landing on the moon sounded impossible. At that time, America could barely send humans into space for a few hours. And now the moon, some officials shook their heads. One general said, "It is too risky." A scientist whispered, "We might fail in front of the world." Failure was not an option. Kennedy understood the risk, but he also understood something else. America needed a big goal, something so powerful that it would change everything. He stood up slowly. Everyone watched him. Then he spoke. "If we choose the moon," he said, "we choose the hardest path." The room was silent. But Kennedy continued, "We also choose leadership." This was the moment, a moment that would change history. Kennedy made his decision. The United States would go to the moon, not someday, not slowly, but before the decade ends. It was a desperate promise, a dangerous promise, but it was made. Soon after, Kennedy stood before the American people. Television cameras rolled, millions watched. His voice was calm but strong. "We choose to go to the moon," he said, "not because it is easy, but because it is hard." The world listened, the Soviet Union listened, and NASA felt the weight of the promise. Behind the powerful speech, fear was growing. NASA engineers knew the truth. They did not have the technology. They did not have experience. They did not even know how to land safely on the moon. Many problems had no solutions yet, but time was running. The clock was ticking. NASA became a battlefield. Scientists worked day and night. Engineers slept on their desks. Mistakes cost lives. Rocket explosions happened. Test flights failed. In 1967, tragedy struck. Apollo 1 caught fire. 3 astronauts died. The nation was shocked. Questions returned. Is this mission cursed? Should America stop? But stopping was not an option, not anymore. The Soviet Union was still watching. America could not show weakness, so NASA pushed forward. They redesigned rockets, they rewrote plans, they fixed problems. Slowly, progress was made. One mission after another. Apollo 7, Apollo 8, Apollo 9, Apollo 10. Each mission came closer to the moon, but none had landed yet. Time was almost over. The decade was ending. Kennedy was gone, assassinated years earlier, but his promise remained. One final mission would decide everything. Apollo 11. This was the mission. Success would make history. Failure would bring shame. 3 men were chosen: Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins. They were trained, tested, pushed to their limits. But even they did not know one thing: what would really happen on the moon. No human had been there before. No one knew what awaited them. Inside NASA, secret meetings continued. Some scientists worried about radiation, others worried about communication failure. One expert quietly said, "What if they cannot come back?" No one answered him. The mission had already started. As launch day came closer, fear mixed with hope. Families of astronauts smiled in public, but cried in private. They knew the risk. Everyone did. The whole world waited. Apollo 11 was not just a mission. It was a desperate call, a call for power, a call for respect, a call to prove something. America was not going to the moon for science alone. It was going for survival in a global race. And deep in space, the moon waited, silent, cold, watching. What really happened next would change history forever. But not everyone would believe it. Apollo 11 moon landing mystery. History often remembers big events, but history rarely remembers the fear inside the people who lived those moments. Apollo 11 was not just a mission. It was carried on the shoulders of three men, three very different men, each with his own thoughts, each with his own fears. The world saw them as heroes, but behind closed doors, they were just humans. Neil Armstrong, the silent leader. Neil Armstrong was not loud. He was not dramatic. He did not seek attention. NASA chose him for one reason. He stayed calm when others panicked. When rockets failed, Armstrong stayed quiet. When alarms screamed, his heart stayed steady. Many people found him cold, some even called him emotionless, but NASA trusted him because silence can hide strength. Armstrong had already faced death many times. Test flights almost killed him. Training missions pushed him to the edge. Once his aircraft crashed during training, he escaped seconds before explosion. After that day, he said nothing, no interviews, no speeches, just silence. Some astronauts talked about space with excitement. Armstrong did not. When asked about the moon, he replied softly, "We will see." That was all. Inside NASA, people whispered, "Why is he so quiet? Does he know something we don't?" No one knew. Buzz Aldrin, the man of fire. Buzz Aldrin was different, very different. He was sharp, confident, sometimes aggressive. He wanted to be first to step on the moon, first in history, but NASA had already decided Neil Armstrong would step first. This decision hurt Aldrin deeply. He never said it openly, but it lived inside him. Aldrin was brilliant, a scientist, a fighter pilot, but his mind never rested. At night, he asked questions. What if we fail? What if we don't return? He smiled in public, but inside storms were growing. Some coworkers noticed something strange. Before the mission, Aldrin began to change. He spoke less. He slept poorly. One engineer later said Buzz looked like a man carrying a secret weight. What weight? No one knows. Michael Collins, the forgotten man. Michael Collins was the third astronaut. Most people forget his name, but his role was the loneliest. He would not walk on the moon. He would stay in orbit, alone, completely alone. While Armstrong and Aldrin walked on the moon, Collins would circle it. One side of the moon blocks all signals. During those moments, Collins would be cut off. No radio, no contact, no help, just darkness. Collins later described it as the deepest loneliness any human has ever known. One mistake, one failure, and he would never return to Earth. No one could save him before launch. Collins wrote letters for his family, just in case. He sealed them. He never told anyone. Training that broke men. NASA training was brutal. Simulators failed on purpose. Alarms screamed without warning. Astronauts were pushed until they cracked. Some cried, some quit. Apollo 11 crew did not quit, but the pressure left marks. One night, Armstrong sat alone in the simulator, lights off, moon landing practice. The computer failed again. Fuel ran low. Seconds left, Armstrong landed safely. The room was silent. An engineer whispered that was too close. Armstrong said nothing. Hidden worries inside NASA behind public confidence. NASA was afraid, very afraid. Some engineers believed the moon dust might be too soft. The lander could sink, never return. Others feared radiation would kill the crew slowly. One doctor warned they may come back, but changed. NASA ignored him. Time was running out. A secret report mentioned something strange. Unidentified radio interference near the moon. The report was classified. Very few people saw it. The astronauts were not told, or were they? The night before launch, the night before Apollo 11 launched, no one slept well. Armstrong stared at the ceiling. Aldrin checked his notes again and again. Collins sat quietly writing. Outside, the rocket stood tall, silent, waiting. Families smiled for cameras. But behind those smiles, fear lived. Armstrong's wife packed his bag slowly. She did not cry. She did not speak. She knew this might be goodbye. A question without answer just hours before launch. An engineer asked Armstrong, "Are you scared?" Armstrong paused, then said yes. It was the most honest word he had spoken. Apollo 11 was ready. 3 men, 1 rocket, 1 promise, but something was different. This mission felt heavy, as if history itself was watching. No one knew what awaited them. No one knew what they would see. No one knew what they would bring back, not just rocks, but memories and maybe secrets. As the countdown began, the world held its breath, and somewhere far away, the moon remained silent, waiting. Apollo 11 moon landing mystery. Every great journey has a point where turning back is impossible. For Apollo 11, that moment came the second the engines ignited. The countdown, July 16, 1969, Cape Kennedy. The rocket stood like a giant shadow against the sky. Saturn V, the most powerful machine ever built by humans. Inside it sat 3 men, silent, strapped, waiting. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8. Neil Armstrong closed his eyes, not to pray but to focus. Buzz Aldrin stared at the control panel. Michael Collins listened to his own breathing. Each second felt heavy. 3, 2, 1. Fire exploded below. The ground shook. The sound was louder than thunder. Apollo 11 lifted off. Millions watched on television. People cheered, some cried, but inside the spacecraft there was no celebration, only force, violent force. Leaving Earth, the rocket pushed them upward, faster, higher. The vibration was so strong it felt alive, as if the rocket itself was screaming. Armstrong held steady. Aldrin checked numbers. Collins reported data. Everything was normal, too normal. At exactly the planned moment, the first stage separated. Then the second, then silence, sudden silence, weightlessness. They were no longer held by Earth, they were free. Earth slowly moved away, blue, beautiful, fragile. For a moment no one spoke, they all looked. That was home, and they were leaving it behind. The first strange feeling. Hours passed, systems checked, everything looked fine, but something felt wrong. Armstrong noticed it first. A strange pressure, not physical. Mental, as if space itself was watching. Aldrin later described it as being awake inside a dream. Collins felt it too. He wrote in his log, "Space feels empty but not dead." NASA heard nothing strange. Telemetry was perfect. Radio was clear, but feelings cannot be measured. Far from Earth. As Apollo 11 moved farther, Earth became smaller. Signals took longer. Help felt distant. If something failed now, there would be no rescue. Armstrong understood this clearly. He said quietly, "We are on our own now." No one replied. They already knew. Silence between words. Space is not loud, it is silent. That silence entered their minds, between checklists, between conversations, between thoughts. Buzz Aldrin started asking questions, small questions, strange questions. What if the computer freezes? What if the engine does not restart? NASA answered calmly, "Everything is under control," but Aldrin was not convinced. The dark side of the moon. 3 days later, the moon filled their window. Gray, cold, unwelcoming. As they approached lunar orbit, something important happened. They passed behind the moon. Communication stopped. Complete silence. No radio, no voices from Earth, only the hum of machines. Michael Collins watched the timer. These were the loneliest minutes in human history. No human voice had ever been this far from Earth before. Inside that silence, something strange occurred. Armstrong noticed a flicker on the panel. Very brief, gone in seconds. Aldrin saw it too. They said nothing. NASA never reported it. Maybe it was nothing, or maybe it was ignored. Orbiting the moon. Communication returned. NASA relaxed. The spacecraft entered lunar orbit. The moon was beneath them, unknown, unexplored, dangerous. From orbit, the moon looked peaceful, but looks can lie. NASA data showed strange readings, small errors, minor disturbances, nothing serious. But unusual. An engineer whispered, "That shouldn't happen." The data was corrected and forgotten. Preparing for descent, the moment was coming. Armstrong and Aldrin would move into the lunar module, the Eagle, a fragile machine, thin walls, limited fuel, designed for one thing only, landing. Collins would stay behind, alone. He helped them prepare, check seals, double-check systems. He did his job perfectly, but inside fear lived. Before separation, Collins spoke quietly, "See you soon." Armstrong replied, "We'll be back." Simple words, heavy meaning. Separation. The Eagle separated from the command module, slowly, gently, two men moving away from the third. Collins watched them drift, smaller, smaller, until they were just a shape against gray. He was alone now, truly alone, one man orbiting a dead world. The descent begins inside the Eagle. Alarms began to sound, unexpected alarms. Computer overload. Warnings flashed, fuel was dropping. NASA engineers froze. They had never trained for this exact situation. Seconds passed, then one voice broke through, "Proceed." Armstrong took control, manual control, heart rate rising, fuel dangerously low. The landing site was wrong, too rocky, too dangerous. He flew forward, searching. Seconds left. Aldrin read numbers fast. 30 seconds, dust rose, visibility dropped. Almost failure. 20 seconds. The fuel light blinked. If it ran out, they would crash. No backup, no second chance. 10 seconds. Armstrong saw flat ground. He descended, slow, careful, then contact. The landing. The Eagle touched the moon. Silence. Then Armstrong spoke. "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." Cheers erupted on Earth, relief, joy, history, but inside the Eagle, no celebration. Armstrong looked at Aldrin. Aldrin looked back. Both felt it. Something was off. The moon was quiet, too quiet, as if it was listening. They prepared to step outside. The first humans on another world, but what they would experience next would raise questions. Questions still asked today. Apollo 11 moon landing mystery. History remembers moments in seconds, but living those moments can feel endless. For Neil Armstrong, time slowed down the moment he opened the hatch. Opening the door inside the lunar module, the air was thin. Machines hummed softly. Armstrong stood still. He checked his suit once, twice, 3 times. There was no room for error. One small mistake and there would be no return. Buzz Aldrin watched quietly. He read the checklist. Every word mattered. Outside the window, the moon waited, gray, silent, still. Armstrong opened the hatch. Nothing happened. No wind, no sound, just darkness and dust. The first descent. Armstrong moved slowly, very slowly. He turned his body, placed one boot on the ladder, then another. Each step was careful, measured, controlled. Millions watched on Earth, but Armstrong did not think about them. He thought only about balance and survival. As he moved down, something strange happened. The surface looked closer than expected. Depth felt wrong. Distance felt confusing. Aldrin noticed it too. He said softly, "The ground looks different." Armstrong did not answer. He continued down. The first step. Armstrong reached the bottom. 1 foot still on the ladder, 1 foot hovering above the surface. This was it. The moment written in history books. He paused, longer than expected. NASA waited, the world waited, then Armstrong spoke. "One small step for man." His foot touched the moon. The dust moved, slowly, unnaturally slow, as if gravity was unsure what to do. "One giant leap for mankind." The words traveled across space, into history. Earth exploded with celebration, cheers, tears, applause, but Armstrong did not celebrate. He looked down at the dust, at his footprint, and felt something strange. The feeling he could not explain. The moon felt wrong, not dangerous, not friendly, just wrong. Armstrong later described it as standing inside a picture. Everything looked real but felt distant, unnatural. Buzz Aldrin joined him. He stepped down carefully, slowly. He looked around and whispered, "Beautiful but strange." NASA heard the word beautiful. They smiled, but they did not hear the pause. The camera problem. A camera had already started recording, placed perfectly, at the right angle. Some people later asked, how was it already there? NASA said training, but the question remained. Armstrong moved forward. The camera followed, smoothly, too smoothly. Some viewers noticed something else. No stars in the sky, just black, deep black. NASA explained it later. Camera exposure. But doubts began to grow. The shadows as Armstrong walked, shadows followed him, but they behaved strangely. Some went in different directions, some appeared sharper than expected. Photographers noticed it years later. They asked questions. NASA answered with science, but not everyone was convinced. Buzz Aldrin's silence. Buzz Aldrin stopped speaking. For several seconds, no words, no breathing sounds. NASA asked, "Buzz, do you copy?" Aldrin answered slowly, "Yes, I copy." His voice was different, lower, careful. He looked at Armstrong. Armstrong looked back. Nothing was said. A strange reflection. Armstrong lifted his visor slightly. Inside the glass, a reflection appeared. Some say it was the lander, some say it was equipment, others say it looked like something else. NASA never commented on it. The image remained unexplained. Time feels different. Minutes passed, or hours. It was hard to tell. Armstrong reported activities, collecting samples, placing instruments, but between reports there were pauses, long pauses. NASA filled them with chatter, but the silence returned. The flag moment. Then came the flag, the American flag, a symbol. They planted it carefully, but as they let go, the flag moved slightly. There was no wind, no air, so why did it move? NASA said the pole moved. But the flag kept waving, just a little. The moment became famous and controversial. The first doubt inside Armstrong's mind. Doubt began not about the mission, but about the place. The moon did not feel empty. It felt watched, observed. Armstrong stopped walking. He stood still, listening. There was nothing to hear, but the feeling remained. Aldrin later said it felt like we were guests. Guests do not belong. The unspoken moment. For a brief moment, the radio went quiet, completely. No NASA, no Earth, only the moon. That silence lasted seconds, but seconds can carry secrets. When communication returned, Armstrong spoke normally, professional, calm, but something had changed. Returning to the module. Time was running out. Oxygen was limited. Armstrong and Aldrin returned to the ladder. The moon remained behind, silent, watching. Before climbing up, Armstrong looked back. One last time. The footprints were there, clear, perfect. But something felt missing. As the hatch closed, darkness returned. Inside the module, Aldrin removed his helmet. He did not smile, he did not speak. Armstrong wrote notes, but some lines were crossed out later. No one knows why. A question that never left. They had done it. They walked on the moon, they made history, but a question followed them, quietly, persistently. Was everything exactly as it seemed? The moon did not answer. It never does, but the doubts, they stayed. Apollo 11 moon landing mystery. History is not always questioned immediately. Sometimes doubt arrives slowly, quietly, years after the celebration ends. The world believed in 1969. Most people believed the moon landing was real. Why wouldn't they? They saw it on television, they heard the voices, they trusted NASA. The astronauts returned as heroes, parades were held, medals were given. The mission was called a success. For a long time, no one asked hard questions. The first small doubts. Years later, photographers noticed something strange. They looked at the moon photos carefully, very carefully, not with excitement, but with curiosity. They asked simple questions. Why do the shadows look different? Why do some shadows go in different directions? On Earth, shadows usually follow one light source, the sun, so why here do they not? NASA answered. The surface is uneven. That explanation sounded reasonable, but not to everyone. The missing stars. Another question appeared. In the moon photos, there were no stars, none, just black space. People asked, how can there be no stars in space? NASA replied, the camera exposure was set for bright objects. Stars were too faint. Again, a reasonable answer, but doubts do not disappear easily. They grow. The perfect camera angles. Then came another detail. The first step on the moon was filmed perfectly. At the right angle, at the right distance. People wondered who placed the camera. NASA explained it was mounted on the lunar module. During training, astronauts practiced this. Still, some felt it looked too perfect, too smooth, almost planned. The moving flag. Then there was the flag, the most famous symbol. The flag moved. It waved, slowly. On the moon there is no air, no wind, so why did it move? NASA said the flag moved because the pole was twisted. Once again, science answered, but the video showed movement that lasted longer, just a little, enough to make people uncomfortable. The Van Allen radiation belt. Then scientists spoke. Not conspiracy theorists, but scientists. They talked about the Van Allen radiation belt, a dangerous zone around Earth filled with radiation. Apollo 11 had to pass through it. People asked, how did the astronauts survive? NASA explained the spacecraft passed quickly. The radiation exposure was low. The shielding was enough. Again possible, but risky, very risky. Some experts said it was dangerous but survivable. Others said nothing. The lost tapes, one of the biggest questions, came later. NASA announced something shocking. The original moon landing tapes were missing, lost. These were not normal recordings. They were the highest quality original data, better than what the world saw on TV. NASA said they were accidentally erased. Used again, overwritten. People were confused. How can history's most important footage be erased? NASA said mistakes happen, but trust was damaged. Strange audio gaps. Audio experts listened to recordings. They noticed gaps, short silences, sudden cuts. NASA explained signal loss, technical issues, but some gaps were too clean, too perfect. People asked, was something removed? NASA never confirmed. NASA never denied. The astronauts' behavior, then attention turned to the astronauts, not during the mission, but after. Neil Armstrong avoided interviews. He refused fame. He disappeared from public life. Buzz Aldrin struggled, depression, anger, alcohol. Michael Collins stayed quiet, thoughtful, distant. People expected heroes to smile, but these men looked changed. A reporter once asked Armstrong, why don't you talk about the moon more? Armstrong replied, there are things better left unsaid. That sentence stayed. The press conference after returning, NASA held a press conference. The astronauts sat behind a table. They smiled, but their eyes did not. A journalist noticed something. When asked simple questions, the answers felt rehearsed. Careful, not wrong, just careful, as if words were chosen slowly, very slowly. Moon rocks. NASA brought back moon rocks. They shared them with scientists. Many were tested. Most agreed, these rocks are not from Earth. That was strong evidence, very strong, but later some samples given to other countries were found to be fake. NASA said those were not official samples. Mislabeling, again a mistake, but doubt returned. Why go back so soon? Apollo 11 was a success, then Apollo 12, Apollo 14, Apollo 15, Apollo 16, Apollo 17. Then suddenly the mission stopped. People asked if we could go to the moon in 1969. Why not now? NASA said cost, focus changed. But technology today is far better, so why did it take decades to plan a return? The question remains. Believers and doubters. Not everyone doubts the moon landing. Many scientists strongly support it. Modern satellites can see landing sites. Laser reflectors left on the moon still work. These are powerful facts. But doubt is not always about facts. It is about trust, and trust was shaken. What if both are true? Some believe the moon landing was real, but not everything was shown. Some believe parts were hidden, edited, removed, not because it was fake, but because it was sensitive. What could be so sensitive? No one knows. The quiet question, the biggest mystery, is not photos, not flags, not shadows. It is silence. Why do astronauts speak so little? Why do answers feel incomplete? Why does the moon feel avoided? Armstrong once said, mystery creates wonder, and wonder creates questions. The evidence does not scream. The evidence does not scream fake. It whispers softly, and whispers are harder to ignore. The moon landing may be real, or it may not be exactly what we were told. The truth may be simple or complex, but one thing is certain: the story is not finished, and the questions are still alive. Apollo 11 moon landing mystery. Coming back from space should feel like victory. But for the men of Apollo 11, returning to Earth felt strange, almost unreal. A hero's welcome. When Apollo 11 landed back on Earth, the world celebrated. Crowds cheered, flags waved, cameras flashed. America had won the space race. The moon had been touched, history was made. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins were welcomed as heroes. They smiled, they waved. They stood tall, but behind the smiles, something felt missing. The quarantine before meeting their families. The astronauts were locked away, 3 weeks, inside a small room separated from the world. NASA said it was for safety. Moon germs, they joked, but the room was quiet, too quiet. The men sat together. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they did not. Armstrong spent hours writing. Aldrin stared at the wall. Collins read books again and again. Something had followed them back. Not dust, not rocks, but thoughts. Neil Armstrong changes after the mission. Neil Armstrong slowly disappeared. He refused interviews. He avoided fame. He left NASA. The first man on the moon did not want to talk about it. When people asked him questions, his answers were short, careful, controlled. A reporter once asked, "What did you feel on the moon?" Armstrong replied, "It was interesting, just one word." For the greatest moment in history. Friends noticed the change. He smiled less. He spoke softly. He avoided eye contact. Some said he was humble, others said he was distant. Buzz Aldrin struggled. Buzz Aldrin suffered the most. Publicly, he became angry, confused, lost. The man who walked on the moon felt forgotten. He drank heavily. He fought depression. He spoke about darkness. In later interviews, Aldrin said, "We went to the moon and came back to silence." Silence, the same word again. Michael Collins, the quiet observer, Michael Collins returned as well, but few people noticed him. He did not walk on the moon, yet he faced something unique: total isolation, total darkness. Collins said, "When I was alone behind the moon, I felt closer to death than ever before." He accepted it calmly, but it stayed with him. He later said, "Not everyone returns unchanged." The press conference revisited years later. People rewatched the Apollo 11 press conference. Not as fans, but as observers, they noticed something strange. The astronauts looked uncomfortable when asked simple questions. They hesitated. Their smiles faded quickly. Their eyes looked tired. It did not look like joy, it looked like relief. Relief that it was over. The questions they avoided, many questions, were never answered. Why did Armstrong avoid talking about details? Why did Aldrin speak in riddles? Why did Collins describe the moon as hostile? When asked directly about mysteries, they changed the topic. One interviewer asked Armstrong, "Did anything unusual happen?" Armstrong paused, then said, "We completed the mission." That was it, the weight of knowledge. Some psychologists studied astronauts later. They believe something important. Seeing Earth from space changes the mind. It changes how humans think. Small problems feel meaningless. Life feels fragile. It's called the overview effect. But Apollo 11 astronauts showed something deeper. Not peace, but heaviness, as if they carried knowledge they could not share. Unspoken agreements. NASA never forced silence, officially, but astronauts signed agreements, rules. Some things could not be discussed, for national security, for safety, for politics. What exactly, no one knows, but silence can be powerful. The long years, decades passed. Technology improved. The world changed. But Armstrong stayed quiet. Even near the end of his life, he did not reveal secrets. Buzz Aldrin spoke more, but not clearly. In one interview, Aldrin said, "We were not alone." Then laughed, then changed the subject. People did not know how to take it, truth or trauma. Some believe the astronauts were hiding something. Others believe they were simply traumatized, facing death, facing isolation, facing the unknown. That can break even strong minds. Maybe the silence is not a secret. Maybe it is pain. The human cost. Apollo 11 was a victory, but it had a cost. Not everyone paid with life, some paid with peace. Heroes returned, but part of them stayed behind on the moon in silence. The question that remains: if nothing strange happened, why does the silence feel so heavy? Why do words feel missing? Why do answers feel incomplete? The moon did not speak. The astronauts did not explain. And the world was left with guesses. A quiet ending. Neil Armstrong once said, "I believe every human has a finite number of heartbeats. I don't intend to waste any of mine." Maybe silence was his choice, maybe it was his burden, or maybe it was protection. The silence after return is louder than any question. Apollo 11 moon landing mystery. Truth is rarely simple, and lies are rarely complete. The Apollo 11 story stands somewhere between belief and doubt, between proof and silence. Two worlds, one question. There are two groups in the world. One says, the moon landing was real, science proves it. The other says, something does not add up, we were not told everything. Both groups are confident, both believe they are right. But what if both are missing something? The believers speak. Scientists, engineers, and astronauts defend Apollo 11 strongly. They present facts, strong facts. They point to moon rocks, rocks that do not exist on Earth, tested by many countries, not just America. They point to laser reflectors on the moon, still working today, placed by Apollo astronauts, used by scientists around the world. They point to modern satellite images, clear marks, landing sites, footpaths, equipment shadows. These are not stories, these are measurements. Data, proof. Believers say, you cannot fake this. The doubters reply. Doubters listen. Then they respond. They do not deny all facts. They question details. They ask, if it was real, why so much secrecy? Why were tapes lost? Why are some images unclear? Why do astronauts speak so carefully? They ask, why does the story feel edited? Not fake, edited. The Hollywood theory. Some people believe the moon landing was filmed on Earth, in a studio, with cameras, lights, actors. They say technology was not ready. Rockets were unreliable. Risk was too high. They believe America needed a win, any win, so they staged it. But this theory has problems, big problems. Thousands of people worked on Apollo missions. Engineers, scientists, technicians. Keeping such a big secret for decades across generations seems almost impossible. The middle ground theory. Then there is a quieter theory. Less dramatic, more realistic. What if the moon landing was real, but not everything was shown? What if some footage was replaced, some audio removed, some moments hidden, not to lie, but to protect? Protect what? National security, technology secrets, psychological impact, or something else? Fear of the unknown. The moon was unknown territory. Radiation, isolation, mental stress. What if astronauts experienced something unexpected? Something difficult to explain. NASA is a scientific organization. It needs certainty, clear answers. Things without explanation create panic. So what if some things were kept quiet? Astronauts as messengers. Neil Armstrong never said the landing was fake. Never, but he also never said everything. Buzz Aldrin sometimes hinted, then stopped. Michael Collins described the moon as hostile. Not dead, not empty, hostile. Words matter. Why silence matters. If the story was fully fake, why send more missions? Why leave equipment? Why stop later? If the story was fully real, why avoid questions? Why avoid returning for decades? Silence sits in the middle. Silence suggests complexity, not lies, not full truth, but layers. Human limits humans like clear answers, yes or no, real or fake, but reality is often messy. Apollo 11 was done by humans. Humans make mistakes. Humans hide fear. Humans protect themselves. Maybe Apollo 11 was a success and also traumatic. Maybe history books show the clean version and humans live the messy one. What if the truth is boring? Another possibility exists. One people don't like. What if nothing strange happened? What if the silence comes from pressure, from expectations, from being turned into symbols? Heroes are not allowed to break, not allowed to say, I was scared. I felt small. I didn't understand everything. Maybe silence is not mystery, maybe it is exhaustion. Why this debate never ends. The moon landing debate continues because the moon is far, evidence is complex, and trust is fragile. People question power, question governments, question history. Apollo 11 sits at the center of that doubt. It is not just about the moon, it is about belief. A simple question: ask yourself one thing. If Apollo 11 never happened, why does the moon still pull us? Why do humans still want to go back? Why does the story still matter? Because something real happened, something big, even if we do not know everything, not fake, not perfect. The Apollo 11 story may not be fake, but it may not be complete, and maybe it was never meant to be. Some truths arrive slowly, over time, piece by piece. The final choice in the end, every person must choose. Believe the official story, question it, or accept uncertainty, because sometimes the most honest answer is, we don't know everything. And maybe that is okay. The moon remains silent, cold, unchanged. It does not explain, it does not argue, it only waits. Apollo 11 moon landing mystery. Final part: the moon has not changed. It still rises quietly, it still shines softly, it still watches Earth in silence. More than 50 years have passed. Generations have changed. Technology has advanced. The world has moved forward, but the moon remains the same, and so does the mystery. Time did not answer everything. Apollo 11 ended in 1969, but the questions did not. They followed history quietly, patiently. Some questions were answered, some were forgotten, some were never asked again. History books show clear pictures, dates, names, achievements, but history books do not show fear. They do not show silence. They do not show what people felt when no one was watching. The men are gone. Neil Armstrong is gone. Buzz Aldrin is old. Michael Collins is gone. The only people who truly know are no longer here to explain. They carried the story with them to the end. Armstrong once said, mystery creates wonder. Maybe that was his final message. Why the moon still matters? People ask, why does this still matter? Because the moon represents more than space. It represents trust. Trust in science, trust in leaders, trust in history. When trust breaks, questions appear. Apollo 11 sits at the center of that trust. Modern eyes, old footprints today. Satellites can see the landing sites, footprints, equipment, shadows. Science says they were there. But science does not explain feelings. It does not explain silence. The silence returns. NASA plans to return to the moon. New missions, new astronauts, new technology. Yet one thing remains unchanged: silence. No one talks deeply about Apollo 11 anymore. It is respected but not explored, as if the story is complete, even when it feels unfinished. The human side of history. Maybe the mystery is not about lies. Maybe it is about humans facing something bigger than themselves. Imagine standing on another world, no air, no sound, no help. Imagine seeing Earth as a small blue dot. That changes a person forever. Some experiences cannot be explained, only felt. What if the truth is simple? What if Apollo 11 was real and terrifying? What if the astronauts felt small, insignificant? What if they realized humans are not as powerful as they thought? That is not a story of victory, that is a story of humility, and humility does not sell well. The moon does not care. The moon does not care what we believe. It does not correct us. It does not explain itself. It was there before humans. It will be there after. It has seen empires rise and fall. Our debates mean nothing to it. Why doubt will never die? Doubt exists because humans want certainty, but certainty is rare. Governments hide things, people forget things, stories change. Doubt is natural. It does not mean denial. It means curiosity. A final thought: maybe Apollo 11 was not meant to answer everything. Maybe it was meant to ask a bigger question: are we ready for what lies beyond? Beyond Earth, beyond safety, beyond understanding. The moon still watches every night. The moon rises. It watches cities sleep. It watches humans argue. It watches rockets prepare. It does not speak, but its silence feels heavy, as if it remembers. The choice is yours. You can believe everything. You can doubt everything. Or you can accept this. Some stories are bigger than truth or lie. They live in between, where mystery exists. The final words: Apollo 11 changed history. That cannot be denied, but history is not just facts, it is also silence. And silence sometimes says more than words. The moon is still there, still watching, still waiting, and maybe one day it will let us understand. Until then, the mystery remains.